Today's video is brought to you by Card Kingdom, and right now you can get this sweet scoop soldier sticker when you order over at cardkingdom.com. Just mention in your order notes that you want a scoop soldier sticker when you go to checkout. Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Brewer's Minute. So this week, we're talking about the new hot button topic in the world of Pioneer, which is Dimir Inverter, and specifically, how can we build our decks to fight against the new best deck in the format? And just to reinforce how important this is, I've been playing some Pioneer Leagues on Magic Online. On average, I play against Dimir Inverter about 2.5 times per league. So about half of my matches over the last week or two have been against the Dimir Inverter deck, which means no matter what you're playing, you want to have a plan for facing this deck. If you just straight up can't beat Inverter, you are not going to have success in Pioneer right now. So our plan for today is basically walk through all the colors and talk about, no matter what color you're playing, how you can build your deck to fight against Dimir Inverter and hopefully have some success in Pioneer. So a quick reminder before we jump into it, if you enjoy Brewer's Minute and the other series here on the channel, it would be amazing of you if you take a second, click that subscribe button down at the bottom of your screen. It's a great way to support the channel and the site for free. So let's talk beating Inverter in Pioneer. And first, to beat Inverter, we got to know how Inverter works. So this is a Dimir Inverter deck. This is Shota Yasuka's deck from the Players Tour event recently. And basically, Inverter is a combo deck. You are trying to use Inverter of Truth to essentially empty your library with its Enter the Battlefield trigger. It switches your graveyard with your library, and then play Thassa's Oracle, or use Jace Wielder of Mysteries to win the game by not having any cards in your deck. So that is the goal of the deck. It does have backup plans, usually some Planeswalkers, maybe some Scarab Gods, and the other important thing to note about this deck is it has a ton of interaction. It usually has somewhere in the neighborhood of like 8-ish removal spells, and then it has counters thrown into the mix as well, so it is going to have ways to interact with the cards that you bring in to fight against it. Oh yeah, also dig through time, big part of the deck. It's a great dig through time deck. It fills the graveyard quickly and dig finds its pieces, so that's how Inverter works. The question is, how do we stop this deck? And first, let's talk about one of the hot button topics, I think, in regards to stopping Inverter, which is Graveyard Hate. So there's been a big debate whether or not you should bring in Graveyard Hate against the Inverter deck. So Graveyard Hate does a couple of things against Inverter. It shuts down Dig Through Time, which is a big benefit. Making Dig Through Time cost 8 mana is a huge deal and something that is very beneficial in the matchup. The other thing that Graveyard Hate, like Rest in Peace or Leyline of the Void does, is it forces the Inverter player to combo all in one turn, because you can't play your Inverter and then put a few cards back into your library, but exile most of it, and then the next turn play your Jace or Thassa's Oracle and win. You have to get up to like 6 mana, play Inverter, exile your entire library, and then Thassa's Oracle to win all in one turn, or 8 mana to Inverter plus Jace. So Graveyard Hate can slow down the deck. On the other hand, we have seen Inverter decks combo off through Graveyard Hate many times. So my take on Graveyard Hate is it can be beneficial, especially because it's good at slowing down Dig Through Time, but it needs to be backed up by other ways of slowing down the Inverter deck. Like, just bringing in Leyline of the Void is not going to beat Inverter. Don't think that that's a realistic plan, but bringing in Leyline of the Void and bringing in extra discard spells to pick combo pieces out of your opponent's hand, that can be a good package of spells to fight against Inverter. Same with Rest in Peace. Rest in Peace isn't going to do it by itself, but Rest in Peace backed by Gideon of the Trials, or some other white cards we'll talk about that are good at interacting with the combo, that could be a legitimate plan. So I think Graveyard Hate can be beneficial at helping fight against the combo, but don't plan on it beating the combo by itself, because that is not going to happen most games. So that's Graveyard Hate. Let's talk about the different colors, and we're going to start with what I think is one of the worst, maybe the worst color at interacting with the deck, which is Mono Red. So Mono Red just doesn't really have ways to interact with this combo. We had Chunky Red, Big Red being one of the top decks in the format a little while ago, like a month ago in the format, and I think in this Inverter meta, Big Red is just unplayable. So if you are a red player, how do you try to compete with Inverter? The answer is you want to be as aggressive as possible. Rather than playing Glory Bringers and big expensive stuff, you want to be low to the ground, playing a ton of 1-drops, a ton of 2-drops, maybe topping your curve off with Torbrand, and basically trying to kill your opponent before they can combo off. Because if there is a drawback to the Inverter deck, it's really like a turn 5-ish combo deck is the fastest it can realistically win. So if you're mono red aggro deck can just kill your opponent on turn 4, you don't really care about the combo. So if you're a red player, skew towards being aggro. I think that chunky red / big red, whatever, is basically just stone unplayable in our current meta, but there were some signs from the Players Tour that very aggressive red decks are actually one of the worst matchups for Inverter and one of the best ways to beat Inverter. So if you're a red player, shift in more 1-drops, go as low to the ground as possible, and try to kill your opponent before they can execute their combo. Next up, we have green, and green is, sadly, another color that's very much like red, that's just not good at interacting with the combo. So how do you build your green decks to be able to fight against Inverter? And I think the answer here is mostly splash a color. So let's say you're a mono-green Stompy player. And mono-green Stompy, one of the nice things about it is if you do get a nut draw, I think you can race the combo, although it's a little harder because they have so much removal, so if they can kill your first mana dork, you're almost never going to be fast enough to actually raise it. But you have a fast enough clock that if you can throw in a bit of disruption to your deck, then you have a pretty legitimate plan. So if you're a mono-green Stompy player, I think what you have to do is not be a mono-green Stompy player, but instead be a Golgari Stompy player. Golgari allows you to bring in a bunch of Thought Seizes, other discard spells like Drill Bit from your sideboard, and then combining that discard with a fast clock, all of a sudden you have a very legitimate plan. Your clock is fast enough to race the combo sometimes, and being able to take just a single combo piece or removal spell from your opponent's hand is enough to maybe swing that matchup in your favor. I think the same is true of ramp decks. If you're a mono-green ramp player, your deck just can't interact with the combo, and it's not anywhere near fast enough to be able to stop the combo, so as you're trying to ramp into your Ulamogs and Ugins, your opponent's just going infinite and winning the game. So if you're a mono-green ramp player, I think you do the same thing we talked about with Stompy. You splash into blue. You could also go into black for discard spells, but I think you have to splash in a second color. Blue gives you counter spells from the sideboard, Disdainful Strokes, Mystical Disputes, whatever, to be able to interact with your opponent's combo. So overall, I think red, you got to be as aggressive as possible. Green, I don't think you can build your deck to be aggressive enough to consistently race Inverter, especially with the removal they have access to kill your mana dorks. So you're pretty much splashing into a second color to have sideboard cards that can hopefully flip the matchup in your favor. Those are the two colors that are definitely the worst at fighting against Inverter. The other three colors actually have some very legitimate plans. So let's talk about blue. And with blue, the easiest thing to do is just deal with the combo on the stack. You have Disdainful Strokes, Mystical Disputes, Summary Dismissals, Whirlwind Denial, a ton of counter spells. And one of the best ways to stop your opponent from comboing by resolving an Inverter in a Thassa's Oracle is just not let your opponent resolve their Inverter or their Thassa's Oracle. So blue counter spells go very far up in value. Be warned, your opponent's going to have discard spells. They're going to have their own counter spells. So you're still going to have to manage the game. It's not like you just bring this in and it's game over. Your opponent isn't playing a glass cannon combo deck with no interaction. But these are some of the best ways to fight it. And I think one of my favorite cards that's seeing basically no play right now that I think can be very good at fighting against the Inverter deck is actually Nimble Obstructionist. So Nimble Obstructionist, you can cycle it for 3 mana and counter an activated or triggered ability. It's basically an uncounterable 3 mana stifle. So what you could do with Nimble Obstructionist is wait until your opponent plays, let's say their Inverter, they exile their deck, they go to Thassa's Oracle and win the game. You could just stifle that uncounterably. Your opponent can't use their counters to interact, stifle that trigger, and then all of a sudden your opponent's going to lose to drawing on an empty library. You can even just like stifle Inverter from switching, inverting, I guess, the library or graveyard. So I think Nimble Obstructionist is a card to keep an eye on because it does seem like a great gotcha card, and it adds a clock to the battlefield, which is also nice. We were talking about the combination of disruption plus pressure being a good way to interact with the Inverter deck. Nimble Obstructionist helps in that regard too if you don't need the stifle mode. You can run it out as a 3/1 flyer, and that's a pretty legitimate clock that can attack Jaces and other planeswalkers. So I really like the idea of Nimble Obstructionist being a targeted hate card for the Inverter deck. So that's blue. Black is interesting. So first off, let's talk about what isn't working in black, which is duress style effects. Lots of people play duress in their sideboard in Pioneer. Traditionally, duress is a good sideboard card, but it's actually pretty bad against the Inverter deck because both of its key combo pieces, Inverter of Truth, Thassa's Oracle, are creatures, so duress can't hit them. Yeah, you could take like a counter spell, maybe snag a Jace or something, but you can't hit the two key cards. Same with Collective Brutality, which is basically another duress. So I think if you're playing a black base deck, there's a couple things you can do. An easy one is swap out your duresses in your sideboard for discard spells that can actually interact with the combo. So rather than duress, I'm assuming you probably already got Thoughtseize in your main deck. That's the staple discard spell of the format. But let's assume you already have Thoughtseize. Instead of duress in your sideboard, I think you're looking at stuff like Agonizing Remorse. Yes, it's an additional mana, but it can get rid of either combo piece, and even snag like an Uro from the graveyard, which is relevant. Then you have Drill Bit, which if you're aggressive, which a lot of black decks are, like mono black aggro, this is an additional Thoughtseize essentially. You hit your opponent, you just cast this, snag a combo piece. So I think changing up the discard package in the sideboard of your mono black deck goes a long way towards shifting the matchup in your favor. Having Thoughtseize in the main and then maybe 4-ish additional discard spells that can actually hit the combo pieces in the sideboard is a really big deal. The other thing black gives you access to is cards that can just strip the entire combo out of your opponent's deck. Lost Legacies, Infinite Obliterations, Stain the Mind, all of these you can cast and just name Inverter of Truth and get rid of all the copies in the deck. It is worth mentioning that we've seen some builds of Inverter do this weird zigzag thing where they're playing Coax of Blind Eternities and leaving one of their inverters in the sideboard to tutor it out. But discounting that, these cards are pretty much game over if you can resolve them against the combo deck, and some of the most effective ways of shutting down the combo. Yeah, you still gotta beat whatever, Thassa's Oracle beatdowns, your opponent playing like a Scarab God or something, but you should be able to handle that if you don't have to worry about the combo. And since we're talking about these style of effects, also worth mentioning Slaughter Games, Unmoored Ego. These are multicolor options technically, but they do the same thing, where they just strip all of a combo piece out of your opponent's deck, making it impossible for your opponent to combo off. So if you're playing black, add non-duress discard to your sideboard. Get rid of the duresses, play the Drill Blitz, play the Agonizing Remorses, and consider Lost Legacy style effects as well that can just completely shut down the combo. Finally, we have white cards, and two of the cards I've been asked about the most as far as fighting this combo are Hushbringer, Tecatli Honor Guard, and technically these cards do shut down the combo. If you have a Hushbringer out, your Inverter of Truth from your opponent isn't going to invert the library and graveyard. A Thassa's Oracle is not going to trigger to win the game because you're shutting down the Enter the Battlefield triggers, and that does shut down the combo. However, I don't actually think these cards are a very effective plan for stopping the Inverter combo for one big reason. When we talked about the Inverter deck, we talked about how it has a bunch of discard spells, 8-ish removal spells, including almost always 4 fatal pushes, along with even more options that can deal with this. So your opponent has a ton of cards that can deal with Hushbringer. So if you just run out of Hushbringer, your opponent is almost certainly going to see it coming, and they're not going to try to combo until they have the fatal push, and then you're going to lose anyway. So even though it looks like these cards would be effective ways of stopping the combo, the way the games plays out, I don't think that's actually true. That said, if you do want to go on the Hushbringer plan, we do have an interesting option in Hushwing Gryff. If you want to try to stifle the Enter the Battlefield trigger, I think Hushwing Gryff is the way to go for two big reasons. The biggest is this one has flash, so your opponent goes for the big combo turn, plays Inverter of Truth, plays Thassa's Oracle, then you just flash in the Hushwing Gryff, you counter that Thassa's Oracle ability, and then you go on to win the game. So flash is a huge, huge deal. The other huge deal is Hushwing Gryff costs 3 mana, and I know it sounds counterintuitive that you'd want your hate card to be an additional mana, but being 3 mana instead of 2 mana means it's much harder to fatal push Hushwing Gryff, so we actually kind of cross off one of the easiest ways for the Inverter deck to deal with a Hushbringer Tecatli Honor Guard by having Hushwing Gryff be an additional mana. So while I don't like Hushbringer and Tecatli Honor Guard to fight Inverter, I do think there's potential in Hushwing Gryff because of flash and because it mostly dodges fatal push, which is a really huge deal. The other way you could fight against this that we've seen people using is Gideon of the Trials. A Gideon emblem makes it so you can't lose the game. It's pretty difficult to interact with. There is some bounce spells in some of the Inverter decks. There is some Planeswalker removal spells. They can attack it with Inverter, but a Gideon emblem is very powerful against Inverter deck, especially backed up by other Gideons. And speaking of Gideons, one card I've had a lot of success with is Gideon's Intervention. The Inverter deck is a turn 5 combo deck, and having Gideon's Intervention, even at 4 mana, is just fast enough, whether you were on the play or the draw, to come down and name Inverter of Truth, that's normally what you want to name, but name one of the key combo pieces, and because the Inverter decks are blue-black, they actually don't have that many ways to interact with Gideon's Intervention. Yeah, they could have like Brazen Borrower, some decks can bounce it with Ashiok, but there's very few ways for the blue-black Inverter deck to actually deal with or resolve Gideon's Intervention, which makes it one of my favorite hate cards for the matchup. Yes, it can still get thought seized, it can get countered on the way down, but if you could get this on the battlefield, it is very close to game over against most current builds of Dimir Inverters. So that is beating Inverter. Hopefully this discussion, these cards, what's good, what's bad, the different builds, was helpful. If you have some ideas of how to compete with this deck at Pioneer, it's just everywhere and so important to have a plan for it. Make sure to let me know in the comments if you got a favorite trick, something you've been having success with. I would love to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed it, and I will talk to you soon.
Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.